Okay, continuing along video number 2. Two or more products that result from common inputs are called, this is a basic definition introduced in Chapter 7, and they're called joint products. So that's just a definition you're going to need to know that makes sense, that when they come from common inputs, meaning you take a block of sand or cement and you throw it into a barrel and then out comes products A, products B, and C, and so forth. And obviously, after you take out the block of cement, certain things are done differently from this point. But up to the point where it becomes the block of cement that you produce, and from there you do something different to get A, and then you do something different to get B, and you do something different from C. The products got a bunch of they're joint products because they're coming from a common input, the input being the cement. And that's the definition. Keep this diagram in mind for the next question, which is at what stage of the production at which individual joint products are identified. What do we call that? And again, definition from the chapter. We call that, look how the diagram looks. This is the common input, all the ingredients to make the cement, and from there we do something a little bit different here, we do something a little bit different there, etc. We get A, B, C, and so we call that point, the point being, let me illustrate the point here. You see how I'm illustrating that with the sound effects? So that point is going to be called the split-off point. That's what we're going to refer to that, and from that point on, we have new costs to think about, but the cost up to the split-off point, key there, cost up to the split-off points is the same. So whatever this cost is gets allocated ABC equally, and then new costs incur from this in this area after the split-off. Cool? Cool. Okay, well, we got to get, sometime we have to do calculations. But this is good. This will teach us some really good stuff here. So let's see what we got. Hopefully you've read through the problem, so I'll just quickly pull out the things we need. We've got obsolete calculators. They've been carried in inventory at cost in 1920. Well, the first thing you have to say to yourself is, this is history. That's in the past, man. That's what you need to say. This is in the past, man. So that's a sunk cost. That we don't care about that. We're talking about a decision from this point forward. What do we do? And now let's see what happens. Well, if we spend $3,100, the problem tells us we can sell them for $4,500. All right. That's cool. It means $1,400 contribution margin. See that? Sales, cost of goods sold, and it doesn't take into account the sunk cost because we're now only interested in the incremental choice of what to do from this point on. So our contribution margin or gross profit, it's not the accounting gross profit because that will include this number, but we're only looking at incremental choices going forward, so we don't take that into account. That's our sunk cost. This is a decision going forward. So what do we got? We got a gross profit percentage of dollar amount rather, or a contribution margin of $1,400 if we choose decision A. Decision A is spend some money, upgrade them, sell them at $4,500. Now decision B, let's see what happens there. Decision B is don't do anything, sell them for $1,600 as they are. Now it doesn't take a rocket scientist at this point to see which decision is the better decision between A or B. And the question asks, what is the net advantage or disadvantage of reworking the calculator? So if you rework the calculators, which is decision A, if you do this, the net disadvantage, actually, as it turns out, is $200 because if you don't do anything, you get $200 more. So the answer is D. Wasn't that fun? And it's not too hard to do. You just have to think it through. You have to, well, let's go forward and see if we can continue to think through these types of problems. Here's another one. Again, hoping that you've read through the problem or you stop the music and take a look. Here's a construction plan to discontinue roofing segment, which last year generated, here's key, this is definitely key, a contribution margin of 65,000. So that's we know we're going to need to know in these kind of problems. We need to know what kind of contribution margin we got. All right, so look, that's positive. So things aren't so bad. However, they had 70,000 in fixed costs. Well, those are the unavoidable costs. So there's not much we can do about that. It might have meant from an accounting standpoint, a financial accounting standpoint, that we showed a $5,000 loss. That's probably true. And so let's make the note of that. Let's make a mental note that we had shown a $5,000 loss after applying the unavoidable fixed cost. So even though this particular, we'll call this choice A, even though A has a positive contribution margin, it's not covering our fixed costs. So not a great idea, and therefore that's why the company considered discontinuing it and looked at, well, what happens if we do? So let's see what happens. Well, what happens if they discontinue it is going to be the following. They're going to be able to avoid half of the fixed costs, hence the unavoidable costs. How much was that? Well, the unavoidable costs or the fixed costs that we saw was $70,000. There it is. So we're going to avoid half of that. What is half of that? What be half of that? All right, so let's see. What be half of that? What be half of that is $35,000. So we're going to save on the fixed side $35,000. So what does this now mean? Because the question's asking, and of course I didn't follow my own advice of read the question first, but the question's asking what is expected to occur to the company's overall profit. So let's see. In the initial go-round, it was a $5,000 loss. That was with A. B is get rid of A entirely. So what happens? Well, we won't have the contribution margin, but we will also have less unavoidable costs. So we'll be down to $35,000. So what's the difference? All right, so the difference now will be the following. Let's clear the deck a little bit so we can see it clearly. I'm going to clear the deck a little bit. I'm going to redo it, so I'm going to clear the whole deck. I'm going to redo what you need. So in decision A, we had 65 contribution margin, but it was 70 unavoidable, so we had a $5,000 loss. Overall, decision B is we'll have 0 contribution margin because we're going to get rid of that. But then we'll have a $35K fixed unavoidable cost. So the result will be our bottom line will no longer be a $5,000 loss. It'll be a $35K loss altogether. It'll be a $35K loss. We'll look at the global aspect of this in a second. Let's just look at the numbers to get to our answer. And so what we see now is we see that our bottom line, what's the change in the bottom line? Our bottom line changes to a decrease of $30,000. It was a 5, now it's going to be 35, so the bottom line goes to 30,000 less, or a decrease, meaning more loss. So we're not going to discontinue. If you look at the two, you're not going to discontinue. And what's going on is it means that the savings of the unavoidable costs is not enough to justify getting rid of product A. So that would not be a good decision. We need to save more of the fixed overhead in order to justify getting rid of A, because again, A is contributing 65K positive to the bottom line, to the unavoidable costs. It's helping cover the fixed overhead. And so that becomes that answer. All right, let's see if we can do one more or two more. Let's see how we do. Okay, production of all the joint products should cease. This is, again, one of those problems that are a little bit more simple than it otherwise appears. So if you read through the answers, production of all the joint product costs should cease. Well, let's see. If any of the individual joint product sells for less than its allocated cost, well, we just saw an example where that's not necessarily true, because what's the allocated cost? That's the unavoidable cost or the fixed overhead. And it might sell, in this case here, we were selling it for less than the unavoidable cost. We were selling it for 65, the unavoidable cost for 70, but it still made sense to continue it, not to cease it. So that doesn't work. That's a tough one to read that, but I think if you keep this kind of example in mind, then you can see why A is not true. B, the total joint cost is less than the total revenue generated when all of the joint products are sold. Let's think through that. What's this basically saying? It says the costs are less than the total revenue. Well, that sounds like profit to me. And that's indeed what it's saying. It says there still is profit. So B's obviously not true. We're still making a profit. What about C? Any of the joint products have a negative gross margin after the joint costs have been allocated. And yeah, that's not a positive thing. That's true because we're talking about gross margin here. And so but the key is it's looking at any of the joint product costs have a negative gross margin after the joint costs have been allocated. So you have to think again, like that diagram I showed before with the cement. If the cement is up to the point of the split off, if those costs are yielding A, B, and C products, and of the three of them, two of them are profitable, but one's not. That's why it says any of the joint products costs have a negative. This one might have a negative gross margin, but the results that when you take into effect B and C with a positive and a significant positive contribution margin, it may be very well worth the company accepting the loss of product A as just part of the cost of doing business, and it's helping to get something out of the three products that are coming out of the cement box in this case. So C is not an answer because it would have to be sort of all of them would have to have a negative gross margin in order to say cease the joint products, and that's what this problem is talking about: joint product costs. And then we have D. Of course, this is the only one left at this point, so we're obviously looking at the right. But see how easy D is when you see it. Total revenue from the sale of all the joint products is less than the joint product cost, or the joint cost in general. So read it. Total revenue from the sale of all the joint products is less than the joint cost. In that case, yeah, that makes sense. You're going to cease the joint products. So how does that differ from this particular picture? Again, B and C were profitable up here. They were yielding a profit greater than the loss that A was yielding. So overall, it was a positive net income. But what if B and C yield gross margins that are less than the loss at A? So that's what D is really about. All right, we'll stop here and pick it up in a sec or soon.